Yes, press record.
Okay, we are recording and it is 5:00 p.m. over here. So hello everyone and welcome to the, I don't know what is medieval seminar series, but the August edition. And today we have Professor Kenna Olsen from Mount Royal University in Canada, all the way from Canada. Professor Kenna Olsen teaches medieval English literature and languages in the Department of English Languages and Cultures at Mount Royal. She was the lead collaborator on the Cotton Nero AX project, an international collaboration between a team of scholars and the British Library to improve accessibility to the Sir Gawain and the Green Knight manuscript. A poem receiving much more popular interest at the moment due to the Green Knight movie, of course, which we're all looking forward to. She also works on secular medieval women's participation in the medieval English literature milieu, medievalisms, and medievalisms. I like that. Kenna is interested in the methods by which we come to critical and scholarly conversations, their sustainability and the efficacy in using digital methods and social media to enhance our critical and scholarly curiosity. Recently, Kenna was made the co-director of the research cluster's, I should have practiced this, ecologies? Okay.
Yep.
Ecologies. Ecologies?
I do ecologies.
Okay, and was awarded the Faculty of Arts Outstanding Teaching Award for her incorporation of emerging technologies in the classroom. So do remember though that this seminar will be recorded and available on YouTube very soon afterwards. So if you do need to leave early or you miss any bits of Kenna's talk, do not fear. And if you have any questions for her throughout or afterwards, we'll be holding a Q&A straight after the talk. So just pop anything in the chat box below. Okay, on with today's seminar. So Kenna will be talking all about emerging medievalisms, capturing polytemporalities for teaching medieval studies. So away you go, Kenna. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Claire. It's so great to be here. Yes, it is nearing evening time over in England and other parts, but it's morning time here, and I'm really pleased to be here. This has been a really stimulating series. I was just chatting with Emma and Claire right beforehand and just saying how wonderful it's been during this COVID pandemic to have something like this to plug into. So I'm really pleased that it's my turn. So what I'm going to do here is just share my screen and make sure that this will work. And I don't want this slide, but yet I want this back slide, sorry. This is like a trailer or something. Should come up. There we go. Okay. You don't need to look at that. I think that should be okay. Yeah, so as Emma mentioned, I come to you from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And my university is Mount Royal University, which is in the city of Calgary. And Mount Royal is also located on the traditional Indigenous territories of the Treaty 7 region, which includes the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, and the Tsuut'ina, also the Yarhe Nation. And I always like to mention as well that the city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation. So we consider ourselves very fortunate here at Mount Royal that we are able to learn and study together on what is Indigenous lands. So my talk today, yes, quite a mouthful, I realized after I submitted my title, Emergent Medievalisms, Capturing Polytemporalities for Teaching Medieval Studies. What I'm going to do today is go through some of the emergent technologies that I've been using recently in my teaching and research. I won't get to all of them, but I do plan on spending most of my time on immersion and the practice and theory of immersion in the medieval studies classroom. I should say that today's talk includes content that is drawn from a chapter that is intended for the Breppels From Medieval to Neo series that Emma and Claire are editing. So my two now former, sad that they're former, but they've gone on to bigger and better things, students and stellar research assistants, Tia Christofferson and Samantha Purchase, need to be recognized. They have been collaborators with me on much of this technology, this experiment of using technology in the classroom. And indeed, they were also student contributors on the chapter that we submitted. So we were having a laugh the other day. Here's hoping that the mood of this talk exceeds the general tone emitted from their pictures and the medieval manuscript image that I selected here for emoting instruction. Thinking about teaching, I was very pleased with the timing of this seminar in thinking about medieval studies, as many of us just now are thinking about a new semester of teaching, how to re-engage in the classroom, and how for many of us, more than a year of remote teaching has changed or not what we do in the classroom and what we do not do in the classroom. The COVID-19 pandemic has asked many of us to reckon with changing needs, both for teacher and student. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation after my little talk today. So to begin my musings on emergent medievalisms, how and why we teach medieval studies, my own discipline is medieval English literatures, has emerged, I feel, to be amongst the most urgent and persistent questions in the general field of medieval studies. And these things, of course, have important implications. One of the challenges is that of a doubled perceived remoteness. So one of those perceived remoteness challenges is that of space, locational and geographical. So this slide shows quite pretty pictures of the immediate urban environment of Calgary, where my students are physically located, upon which the medieval seems, at first glance, to have very little immediate influence. Yet still, many of my students experience the medieval via seemingly innocuous medievalisms. Here's but one example, where spaces and places are given medieval sounding names. This tendency is not necessarily dangerous, but it does implicate ourselves in a challenge as teachers, as we have to deal with students' perceived notion of what the medieval is. And when we have to do this in the classroom, it takes time to unpack this perception that they come to our classroom with. And then it takes time to analyze why we have these things and why these perceptions and these anticipations. And apparently the medieval can be placed nearly anywhere as long as we make it recognizably so. So Calgary has a lot of suburbs just outside of its direct city, and many of them have these medieval-esque names and get things like coats of arms, and some even have ruins. So they put some bricks up and tried to make it look really old and things. So here are some Calgary urban medievalisms. Most of these are places of worship, though the picture of the building down at your bottom left is that of a school that was built in the early 1900s. And my favorite is down on the bottom right, which is quite a famous house in one of the more to-do neighborhoods in Calgary. I've always looked at this and thought it was rather magnificent in many ways. So perhaps if it's ever for sale, my 40 closest friends and I can cobble our pennies together and see if we can purchase it. These Calgary medievalisms allow us to further consider the seemingly remoteness to many of the medieval period, as this poses particular problems in articulating the persistent relevance and importance of knowledge of the medieval to our students. So in thinking back to my previous slides, the medieval seems at once remote environmentally and temporally, and yet it is present in places like Calgary, in places such as these, though perhaps in haphazard form. The medieval is then, as my title suggests, polytemporal. And I noticed that this term I used, polytemporal and polytemporalities, even a couple of days ago on the Twitter feed for the seminar series, garnered a little bit of interest. I think the question was something like, how do scholars expect to engage the public if we need to use terms like polytemporality? And I appreciate the gentle nudge. I agree that public engagement is important. In fact, it's one of the reasons why I've invested so much time recently in trying to figure out how these emergent technologies might help or not help us in trying to articulate what it is that we actually do to the general public. So public engagement is important. And I agree that avoidance of academic jargon should be encouraged, especially if it is superfluous or alienating. But I think it's also important not to condescend to our audiences by effacing subtle conceptual distinctions in the language we use. Terms like polytemporality are provocative and stimulating. In my experience, they have invigorated audiences, and these terms also draw out questions from audience members, which stimulates general conversation. So to my mind, these qualities are positive in our attempts at public engagement. So continuing with the term polytemporality or polytemporal, and considering what that means, we accept at once that the medieval relies on an artificial but helpful delineation of date. So we could say the medieval occurred in something like the 5th century, the 6th century to 1550. And we most often say that periodization is necessary to make studies of the past more articulate and helpful. But along with our acknowledgement of the necessity of periodization, we have this resurgence or increase of medievalisms and neo-medievalisms in our popular culture. This means that the medieval is now, it is created, it is recreated, it is redefined, and it is reimagined, but it is substantive, and it has effect in our culture and in our imaginations. So the medieval operates, I suggest, in multitudes of times and locations. So the medieval is not only polytemporal, operating in multitudes of times and locations, but the medieval then operates as a pluriversity, a pluriverse, because using a term like pluriversity allows us to readily reference that one of the signifying characteristics of the medieval is its plurality, not only of time, but of space. Many of the emergent technologies that I've been incorporating into my medieval studies teaching have emerged because of this Newish Library and Learning Center that was built in opened in 2017 at my institution. You can see in the slide, the exterior slide, this must be from 2017, this picture I've chosen because we still have the construction markers in the front on the roadway. But you can see that this is, as so often is the case in Calgary, this building, it presents a very modern internationalist style. Then students enter the building and again, they have a very modern environment. They walk the staircase when they walk to my classrooms, where then I'm going to ask them to consider medieval literature and medieval literature textually, medieval literature within a manuscript environment, but also within their own popular and everyday lives. So within this environment, I'm asking them to consider and consume aspects of the medieval. Here, this slide, I'm going to pause on this for a little while because it might take a little time to digest. But what I have here are some tweets that demonstrate, and I know we're all familiar, how the medieval is created and how the medieval creates beyond physical location, but also digitally. Some of my favorites here I pulled out. I think my favorite is the one in the middle. What if the Middle Ages never actually happened and it was all just a long-term publicity stunt for Game of Thrones? So lots of sort of friendly but provocative bantering about what happens when we consider and imagine and recreate the medieval in popular culture. This one, of course, points to, the one on your top left points to the movie A Knight's Tale, which was really an interesting, I think, exploration of having a medieval sort of moments in plot and character, but quite fantastically having very post-medieval costuming And some of this mashup really does bother historians who say, of course, this isn't authentic and it should be avoided. So this kind of conversation is happening, and our students are aware of these conversations. So I like to bring this sort of conversation into the classroom. These tweets here speak to the issue of the misappropriation and the misuse of the medieval. Currently happening, I have to say, at astonishing and quite worrying rates. So this is likely for those of us in the audience, not a new issue. But these tweets give a synopsis of the challenges for medievalists of dealing with space and time. Often because the real or perceived distance from the medieval itself troubles our ability to encourage learning and engagement between the medieval and post-medieval. And when we have people who are quite adept at misappropriating and misusing the medieval for political and harmful gain, this causes, again, yet another challenge for us in the classroom. These tweets distinctly interact with the misappropriation of the medieval. Perhaps the one that is useful, although I don't like to call attention to any of these, is the one on the left with the flag that has the, in the middle, the Ethel rune, the home rune. Of course, this is a direct parody of the Nazi standard, and is worrying that it's very worrying indeed that this sort of conversation is something that we have to negotiate for our students in helping them understand and articulate what the medieval was and what it is. So these tweets show yet another challenge for us as students and teachers of the medieval. When we have these sorts of challenges, I think at best, the challenge contributes to fragmented ideas of the history of literatures, the history of philosophies, and so on. At worst, this sort of challenge contributes to, oh dear, the light is coming right in. There we go. Hopefully that's a bit better for those of you watching. This sort of challenge contributes to real systemic misunderstanding of what medieval culture was. Okay, so as a start towards some remedy of the challenge of location, I began to intentionally include aspects of digital and emerging technologies in my teaching and research. One of the things I did is start doing these things that we call bardics. So reading poems against their original manuscript environment so that the students can appreciate what these literatures look like in manuscript form, and also can appreciate how they sound. So I'll just play this from the beginning.
Construed is casting plainly.
Here we go.
New nays the new here, and the neat passes, the diad riva to the dark, as street and bidders. But wield wearers of the world wackned the root. Clued is casting plainly the cold to the earth, with knee enough of the north, the knocked to attain. The snow snittered full snart, that sneeped the weald. The werbeland winda wapped through the here, and drove each dollar full of drifters full great. The Lewid listened full well that lie in his bed. Thy he locus his litters, full little he sleepes. Be each cook.
I'll just pause there. So you'll see that this is Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. I chose this one, of course, because of the resurgence of attention that poem is getting because of the movie, The Green Knight. So you can see that the students get, I'm sorry, I'm struggling with my light here. The students can access this at any time. They can see the text and hear me reading so as to appreciate you know, in Canada, it's very difficult for students to access, to see physically in person medieval manuscripts. So resources such as this have proven to be quite helpful. I've also been fortunate enough to do quite a bit of teaching in the visualization classroom. These are visualization walls that were built into the new library. So the screens of these are essentially school bus size, so very large, like 6 by 2 meters. And what happens is presenters can include simultaneously several types of data, images, text, video, and the amount of input or various input is actually endless. So I think the stills that you have here are from, we had a class on the day that Notre Dame was burning. And so we put up current and emerging media stories. I don't think the picture shows this, but we had a Twitter feed running from the medieval studies hashtag. And then I can put up, as you see on the right, I put up some medieval images to think about materiality and how that affects our ability to memorialize and think about memorialization. Now, this is Twitter is certainly not an emerging technology, but it is a very, very real aspect of many of our lives. Hashtags such as medieval Twitter have become necessary in my life as a scholar. And I felt that there were some possibilities in contributing to the sustainability and accessibility of medieval studies via my teaching if I incorporated Twitter. So what you have on this screen on the far left and far right are screenshots of 2 assignments that I gave my students. They were asked, they were assigned a certain number of lines of text and then asked to distill those lines into a tweet. So we worked on the early English romance King Horn, and then in another class we worked on Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. And in the middle of your screen, you have some of the what I thought were very stimulating examples. You can see that students had to work through, they were allowed to use emojis and GIFs and such. What I thought would be sort of an experiment that would really invigorate student participation and perhaps lessen anxiety and increase aspects of accessibility became what was at first astonishing to me, a fabulous exercise in close reading. Students really were able to explicate so carefully when they had to think about how to fit a certain number of lines in a certain number of characters. And so this sort of assignment is something that I don't think I can't imagine I would ever abandon anymore in my medieval studies classes. It's worked so famously. So there is just a little screenshot of a podcast I did called All Aboard the Medieval Studies School Bus. Again, locating that aspect of polytemporality in the title there. If people are interested, it's available online. Okay, and now here, I can begin to speak about the Immersion Studio, which is where the emerging technologies, sorry, I'm really frustrated with my lack of shades in my office. Here we go. The Immersion Studio is where the emerging technologies centered around digital world building, which has been occurring in my classes and research. So hopefully these 2 shots give you an idea of the studio itself, which is a gray room box equipped with short throw projectors that use specialized software to stitch images together into a continuous display for immersive effect. So the room is actually nearly square. It's not round. It's 9 by 8 meters. It has a specialized sound system. So all of that gives a 360-degree experience. The Immersion Studio then allows for an environment to be created that supports simulation and context-based learning. Students can interpret information in relation to where and when it has occurred. So here you have 2 stills from some work that we did in the Immersion Studio. Essentially, we participate in world building. With the term world building here, I don't mean world building in the Tolkien-esque sense, where a setting is given comprehensive attributes or forms, a history, a genealogy, a culture, a geography. Instead, what we do is we propose a pluriverse. That pluriverse promotes a medieval literary setting and understanding that cultivates a recognition of historical difference in a post-medieval setting. So to explain, when I teach these classes, I stress to students that medieval literature invokes a literary ecology of consciousness that is itself derived from an immediate medieval environment. What that means is, if you look at the still at the top right, here we have Colin Gibbings, a colleague of mine. He's a doctoral student at the University of Calgary. He is performing the Old English poem, The Rune. And what we've given students there is the opportunity to be immersed in a medieval environment of runes themselves. What we have on the bottom left is students who chose this immersive environment for analyzing the Middle English poem, Pearl. And here they're giving their presentation. So by participating in our own three-dimensional immersive technologies for world building, we explore how medieval English literary form can be rendered via environmental response and how such ecologies of consciousness, I am doing this, there we go, because I realized no one can see me. Okay, there we go. And how such ecologies of consciousness can be understood in a post-medieval world whose lexis of landscape or experience of space has changed from that of the medieval. So the proposition of the pluriverse in the Immersion Studio means that we consider medieval literature via responses to and creators of cultural and temporal spaces via digital surrogates and methodologies. For those of you that are interested, what the term we use once these are stitched together are called wraps. Essentially, these are high resolution images, very high, 1920 by 1080 pixels at a minimum, usually 4K or higher. So we always want brilliant and clear images, exactly what you're not getting from me right now because of my my frustration with the sun and my office. I apologize. But these wraps accompany each text or passage of text. And so what we're doing at once is attempting to bridge temporal barriers between the medieval and the post-medieval age, such as assumptions of incipience or progress. We often incorporate, as you can see on the top right, wraps that include identifiable environments whose origins are medieval, alongside those that showcase medievalisms or those that do not obviously resonate stereotypical medieval characteristics. And I'll show you more of that to come right here. I'm going to play this first video and then speak to it. Oops. So that particular performance shows Colin Gibbings performing the rune in a environment evocative of a medieval runed environment.
Walden with for wearene, gelerene, hervik prus, of hund kune, where the you week. Oft this why ye ba, rehar and repa, reach after odrum, of standen under stormen.
So for a poem invested in aspects of isolation, looking at built environments from people of the past, we have on the left video a very rural environment with a modern building. This is a 360-degree video as well. I wanted to show sort of what the entire room looks like. And so to challenge students' assumptions of how relevant medieval literature may be to the post-medieval time. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight happens to be a poem I spend a lot of time with, even before the Green Knight movie has again given it so much resurgence and popularity. The video on the left simply shows a rap that we use. This is for winter scenes of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Much of the poem is invested in Gawain's challenge with his environment. And we consider placing those sorts of passages of text against raps like this, or then against a more a green environment to see how our observations with the about the poem changes when we immerse ourselves in such environments. One of the things I tried recently was to finish a term in which we studied Sir Gawain and the Green Knight with an immersive feast. So students were immersed in differing environments, which allowed them to consider the participatory, political, and social dimensions of medieval feasts, while considering the importance of the feast as a literary topos, as it is, to a text such as Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. So on the right, you have just stills of the students in considering that space and working in that space. And on the left is a video of a bedchamber. Many of you might remember that much of the anxiety and angst in the poem for Sir Gawain occurs in a bedchamber, and so we use that opportunity to consider those passages in that digital surrogate environment. Here are more stills of that particular event where students were asked to read some of the passages of text, respond. On the bottom left, you can see there I lead the group in the middle. It really was an invigorating experience. In addition to world building with such raps, we also consider world confusion. This works very well with some medieval English texts. This rap that I'm showing you here, we paired against Sir Orfeo. Sir Orfeo, of course, deals with places of wilderness and the underworld. So this video shows the cerebral and visual confusion and intrigue, as Sir Orfeo is often not entirely sure where he is, although certain moments of his environment he can recognize, though he cannot locate. Here, I already mentioned the poem, The Pearl. This still, I should say, on the left shows a rap that students chose that they felt evoked the concept of an environmental paradise for that poem. And on the right, they're still showing what other students chose. And sometimes we deal with world deconstruction rather than world building or world confusion. This particular rap we paired initially against the battle of our consideration of the Old English poem, the Battle of Malden. So students read and heard passages of that text against this rap. We also had audio in the room that spoke, that emitted noise of battle, so swords clanging, anguish cries, and such. And here, yes, we even take medievalism. So many of you might recognize this from the Game of Thrones. We use these for literature that evokes violent physical action. Here, again, I think we are considering the Battle of Malden and asking students if their experience or understanding of the poem differs against differing immersive environments. So to circle back to some of Colin Gibbing's performances, just to join those concepts of world building and capturing polytemporalities. In these stills, Colin is still, again, performing the Rune, this Old English 10th century poem. The Rune is, as I said, interested in ideas of the solitary, isolation, how one moves against and with their environment, especially an inherited environment. And so Colin performed the poem against those medieval ruins that you saw. He then performed the poem against a very rural environment. And then he performed the poem against, actually this rap shows downtown Calgary at evening time. So the students had a very different reaction against each location. And what we do for classes and performances such as this is that we give the audience members or the students some exit questions that allow them to consider how environment of time and place affects or not their understanding and ability to analyze and appreciate text. These are other stills that show some of Colin's work, still with the Rune. The Rune is quite famous because itself, as a physical artifact, is ruined. The medieval text in the manuscript has a very large, I'll show it to you in a moment, tear. And Colin did a performance where he made the reading of the poem and himself in this immersive environment as performer, very glitchy in the moments of text that we are missing. So here is that manuscript folio I was referring to. So there are lines of poetic text that we are missing. And Colin and I spent quite a bit of time thinking about how we might immerse the students in this idea of absence or the unknown. So in thinking with the students about how the materiality of a manuscript text affects the performative, immersive decisions that we are confronted with when we use this sort of technology. And the last point I wanted to make is that all of this work is not only useful for teaching, I've also found it very stimulating for my own research. Recently, I've been thinking about and working on Chaucer's House of Fame, in which Chaucer describes in poetic text a wicker house that is chaotic and confusing, and it's where all sound from the world goes and bounces around. And so I thought myself I would give it a go and actually build Chaucer's wicker house as he describes it. So I used a virtual reality program to immerse myself and students into this wicker house as described by Chaucer. This is a bit of a teaser. If you want to see the full effect, you'll have to come to the meeting of the new Chaucer Society next summer, but here we go. Oops, that went too far. This should play. Here we are. What Chaucer does is he creates a world confused environment in which he has sound built upon sound, built about sound, and that doubling effect becomes very chaotic and disruptive and disturbing for the dreamer in the poem, The House of Fame. And so here you have a screenshot of audio files that I build in when I perform and consider this poem against the visual and immersive environment. So then we also have a sonic chaotic experience happening at the same time. It's actually quite dizzying, and I've found I have to give warnings to audience members.
So gone forth with him to gone, out of the castle, so to say, the softly stand in a balhe, under the castle, fast to be, and who's the domus gadadi, the labyrinth clepidis, nas mad so wonderly she was, a half so quaintly she thought, and evermore as swift as thought, this quainter who's a bruta went, that nevermore hit still a stent, and thereout come so great a noise that heb hit standen upon noise, men nicht hit can heard esli to wrong.
So I don't know how readily one can tell from the 360-degree video that the speed of the spinning of the wicker house increases, and the auditory files become layered one against the other while I read that poem. So it's been quite interesting to consider what the shape of the thing and the experience as described by Chaucer in the House of Fame might actually have looked and felt like. So what's the gain from emerging technologies and the Immersion Studio? It's a lot of work to learn how to use these technologies, and still after doing that, I can't even figure out how to deal with lack of blinds in my office. But one of the things that's happening with this kind of emergent technology is that students learn to track their responses to different stimuli. They have different environments, and then they observe how their responses change their understanding of a text, and therefore the conceptual world that is built inside the Immersion Studio. As we all know, this means that they are participating in active learning, which is quite profound and meaningful for most students. Immersion in these environments solidifies how our engagement with poems or texts perpetuates a temporal plurality, and that reading early medieval literature is one of the many ways that we engage with the past and challenge misunderstandings of the past. This particular point has become important with performances where the general public attends. And of course, technology is usually fun, but the work here is beyond gimmicky or superficial aesthetic effect. It allows for materiality of affect that is necessary for analysis and attempts at understanding. The effect of the Immersion Studio is a richer, deeper engagement with the text at multiple levels and through various avenues of experience, such as the oral, the visual, the visceral, and the cognitive. The performative aspects of the Immersion Studio become educational. Audience members, students, and the public alike engage in textual understanding and analysis. As such, medieval studies in the Immersion Studio and via such emergent technologies that I've been talking about today enables us to resist that trivial reduction of the medieval we so often see and experience in popular culture. And so engagement with the medieval becomes more profound and immediate. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Kenna. I'm hoping I've popped back up on screen for everyone now.
You have. I'm gonna
oh,
see
brilliant. Okay.
what happens if I do this. Okay, I'm moving around my office. I don't know if you can tell. I'm like doing circles. I'm so sorry. I came early even to like set all this up. There. Okay.
That's fabulous. Yeah, we can see you fantastically. Thank you so much for that. I do need to quickly say that unfortunately Emma has been cut out from the meeting because her Wi-Fi has gone down.
Oh,
so
no.
I know. She's desperately trying to get back in.
Oh, so, no. So on the talk that dealt with technologies, we had all kinds of
technology fails. I know. How typical is that? I was just going to say, if anyone does have any questions, please pop them in the chat box now. But
Claire, should I stop sharing my screen now?
Yeah, if you want to. Yeah, that's perfect. But I would like to, if I may, start with a question of my own, because I'm chair and I get that.
You get to do that.
I get to do that, basically. You mentioned in your talk that you were using different wraps and different immersive environments when reading Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and the students sort of reacted differently. I just wondered if you could sort of expand on that a little bit more, and how the reactions differed, and how students really sort of saw the poem differently, perhaps.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Thanks for letting me talk more about that. And actually, generally, that is the case with any of the texts we've been reading, that the students in general have felt their ability to understand the weighty bits, can I say, of a text much more readily. And so And I appreciate that for them, they get only a term or two of instruction in medieval English languages. They also get that instruction from me. And so, they're trying to grapple with a language barrier as well. And I didn't really speak about that very much today, but I think it's very hard for them to appreciate, though the Gawain poet spends, verse paragraph after verse paragraph describing how Gawain's challenge is actually that he's wearing a suit of armor in the winter. And he's searching for something. He doesn't even know what it looks like. He doesn't know where to go. He's so frustrated and it's so cold. And so it's been kind of fabulous to be able to put up, this winter wrap, read those passages, have birds, peeking piteously in the background, and students go, oh wait, now I know why we're not getting a dragon for Gawain to slay or to fight with, that sort of thing. And then as I was trying to explain, hopefully I was a little bit successful in giving students environments that they are not anticipating at all, sometimes for a poem, really does make them focus very, very carefully on the words. And they'll say, wait a second, you haven't done that quite right. Or they'll say, oh, I like that you did that because I didn't quite notice that, he's feeling whatever it is, not only challenged this way, but he's also feeling guilt, not just shame, and that sort of thing. So it's been very interesting to see what sticks and what kind of analysis can be sort of provoked from a different environment. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And the other, quickly, I know we've got some questions coming in the chat box now, but just while I've got you, obviously we have lots of talk about, the numbers, particularly in the UK, for students taking medieval topics is dropping.
Yeah.
Do you think using these different sort of immersive technologies is a way to help engage students that perhaps wouldn't typically choose the medieval topics or things that are slightly outside their comfort zone? And have you got experience of that?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I think the end of my long convoluted thinking and musing about that question, I think, is yes. So students, I think, especially in Western North America, they feel so alienated from the subject. They don't feel, some of them have never been beyond Western Canada. They don't have the experience of walking, say, past a Roman wall in London, every day going to get their coffee. They find it very hard to imagine these places that are described and evoked in text. And when they feel I want to be very careful here, because I really don't think that literature is important only if it's relevant to us. But the point is in trying to help at least an initial connection for them to see why it's relevant. Students get very excited in that classroom in the Immersion Studio when they realize that, say, the Old English Wanderer, I've performed it in a back alley in Calgary where it's raining and it's like very sad-esque, and they can say, oh, there it is. They get very excited when they, the poetic speaker is dealing with this aspect, and it's still in the now, it's still relevant. Or sometimes I get, that didn't work at all for me. Like I've never even considered this concept of wondering about whatever it is. So I do think that even that sort of chatter has made the idea of why we feel it's necessary and important for students to have not just a pointing finger backwards, but to really be able to negotiate with why it's important that we that we can say these ideas we're also being bantered about with this culture. I think it's very important. I think it helps them, and useful, and I think it's working. I think it helps them consider, yes, what is similar, but I think it also allows them to consider historical difference in a useful way, rather than just saying, no, it doesn't apply to me, back to whatever. And also it's something that we can do together. So I say, I don't know, does this environment work for you after you've read the poem? And they say, yeah, absolutely, let's do this. Or they say, that's not at all what I was thinking. And so for some students who are more reticent to articulate their thoughts or their analysis in class, I find this is kind of a way, maybe not so sneaky, but I like to think I'm sneaky, a sneaky way to get students to really participate in a meaningful way. Because then I can say, oh, I think what you're trying to say is this. And they say, that's exactly right. But really they're perhaps just more comfortable speaking about visuals than they are about words. So that's a really long answer. Sorry.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. I have got a question in the chat box from Howard, who says he very much enjoyed the talk. Can he ask how you capture student responses to these various immersive media?
Yeah. So a lot of that, as much as I'm talking about emergent technologies, today I still do a lot of chalk and talk, the old lecture. So a lot of it is classroom discussion. But as I mentioned, probably too quickly, and I was probably dealing with trying to go in a circle here. So apologies if it wasn't clear, but usually I make up a series of exit questions for students to write their responses in immediately after the class or the performance, because we've had some public performances. How did this specific environment articulate the description in stanza 2 of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, but also ask them to respond to that same exit question like a day later, because that distance of time, I think, affects, our memory is affected with time. And so what I've noticed there is that the possibilities for visceral engagement with the text is really important while in the immersion studio. Once people have to recall a memory of a text, it's easier if they can recall also how they felt while in that text. And so that's how I've been dealing with that. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, Howard, does that answer your question? You can give me a thumbs up if you want.
You can give me another one.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. And you mentioned as well, you've used performances and things, and this is just something I was thinking as I was listening to your talk. Obviously, you've got fantastic facilities that enable you to do all this sort of, the 3D wraps and things. Have you done sort of work where you've taken the students out into, I don't know, the natural environment to do this type of thing? Because I'm just, I'm thinking about my teaching this year, and I know where I am. Unfortunately, we don't have that kind of facility. I was just wondering if that works as well, or as if you've got experience you could share with us, because I'm sure a lot of people are thinking, I'd love to do this. I don't think the university are going to get me a 3D wall wrap.
I know. Yeah. No. We can't all sort of get our boards to decide to the spend that this requires. And actually, the funny thing about that Immersion Studio is that was a room that was originally intended for something else, and they realized it wouldn't work. And we have some fabulous deans and such here that said, I think we should give this a go. And there is another Immersion Studio. It works a bit differently at my neighborhood institution, just up the road at the University of Calgary. They built that intended for health and medical students. They thought people would use that to study the body, and the need then for face-to-face physical learning would lessen. But in fact, the uptake has been from humanities and arts students and scholars doing similar things that I'm talking about. I have tried to do this sort of in person, in the moment, in a real place. And of course, it really depends on the cohort of students. But I find that you can make this work really anywhere, but the problem is that you're stuck with the one space. You can't, in a class sort of be traipsing all over the place and saying, okay, drastically different from winter. Now I'm going to give you summer and see what you say. So that's one of the, again, advantages of all this digital stuff. But I do think that, if you can take students out of a place where, the seating is maybe not even movable, where they can move if they so desire, while they're trying to think through a text, I think that can be helpful, but of course it's so difficult because the element of distraction can become quite a challenge too. But I do think it's useful. I mean, you know, depending on our vintage, we all probably had some sort of field school when we were, you know, first doing our postgraduate study. And I remember those with great fondness, and I learned a lot. So while this isn't exactly the same thing, I do think that education that involves a specific or differing environments is always going to be useful. Yeah,
fantastic, thank you. I've just got another question that's popped through. So, do you feel there is a challenge of immersive experiences enhancing misconceptions rather than disrupting or challenging them?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Howard. I do think that there is that worry, absolutely. So that's where our teaching really needs to take place and has to be immediate and in the moment. I've never been an advocate of digital or virtual or remote teaching and learning on its own. I think there has to be a blended approach. So even with the Twitter feed, we will have our class hashtag up in the classroom, so that if a dangerous, which has happened in my classrooms, or just misunderstood notion comes across, I can deal with it then. And actually that's a good thing because it's a teaching moment. And I'd rather find out while I'm there than after the fact. I do think, you know, without an expert or a scholar, I suppose, these sorts of misconceptions could garner some, you know, some more attention, but hopefully if we keep these things, you know, restricted to in-house teaching classes rather than just sort of willy-nilly or to, you know, anyone to use and sort of try to use without some subtle, even sometimes teaching. Yeah, I think that enhancing those misconceptions while we're trying to deal with them in medieval studies is something all of us are worried about pedagogically. So I appreciate the notion.
Yeah, thank you. He's replied, thanks again, helpful answer. Agree on the need for careful managing, guiding of the experience.
Yeah.
That's fabulous. We are coming up to time, so if anyone does have any last minute questions, please pop them in the chat box. And while I give you all a moment to do that, I'd just like to say thank you so much, Kenna, for that.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for being present. And apologies to everyone who has to deal with me trying to scoot around and avoid the sun. I'm so frustrated because I came early just to make sure that didn't happen.
But anyway, the way, isn't it? But no, honestly, thank you. And we're so excited to have your chapter coming in the forthcoming Brepols volume. And of course, you're a member of our editorial board, so you're going to be very involved in.
Yes, no, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
It's been brilliant, and I can see lots of thanks and people saying they've really enjoyed the talk coming through. Do you remember, if your internet has failed or you had to drop out of the session early, this will be up on YouTube in the very near future. We will also be back on the 22nd of September for our next seminar, so please make sure you join us then. But please just, you know, join me in thanking Kenna again for an absolutely fascinating talk, and I've really got some ideas to take away for my own teaching now for September.
Oh, that's great.
So thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night, everybody. Good night.